For a while. Hey, it's Phil. I'm back. I haven't broadcast for a while. Um, and so, first I want to tell you about this image that you see. Um, it's uh, it's from a story that it's from a story that I'm working on. Well, the story's pretty much done. Um, and Journey's illustrating a particularly gruesome part of it um, that plays off of Prometheus, you know, and and his disturbing end. Um, so I'm happy with the way it's turning out. But I wanted to talk about one of my favorite series from one of my favorite writers, and that is Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Um, and I have to say, I had only ever read like the first 7 or 8 issues of a Swamp Thing run, which were great. Um, Anatomy Lesson is one of the great horror stories of all time, um, and Swamp Thing's conflict with Jason Woodrow, um, the introduction of John Constantine. Um, just so many great things happen in that first graphic novel, but I never really got past it. Um, and I can't believe I didn't. Um, so, for those of you like me who are familiar with Alan Moore from his limited series, maybe particularly Watchmen, um, and perhaps V for Vendetta as well. Let me tell you something that those two series do that Swamp Thing does not. Those two series are restrained, and they have to be because they are limited series. Moore only had 12 issues, well, actually, I think V for Vendetta was 10. But in addition to being restrained by the number of issues he had to work with, um, he was also restrained because he had a beginning, middle, and an end, and a defined beginning, middle, and end. Um, so, um, so if you take for example, DC Comics, um, DC Comics a few years ago had a series called, I believe, Before Watchmen or something like that, in which creators um, uh, basically created their own stories using Alan Moore's Watchmen characters, and this is stuff that happens before the Watchmen series. So it's they're prequels basically. I never read them, but Alan Moore couldn't really do that in Watchmen. Imagine if the 12 issue series had split off. Imagine if he'd written like a 15 issue series and 3 issues were things like, what's Captain Metropolis doing? Alan Moore tells you the stories and Watchmen that you need to know to understand everything else going on in Watchmen. And so there's a lot of discipline in Watchmen, and there's a lot of discipline in V for Vendetta. But in Swamp Thing, there is playfulness. It's expansive. You know, like I'll just give you like some small examples. He keeps on introducing new characters. Just Constantine is one of them. Constantine, who strings Swamp Thing along over like a dozen issues or so. Come and have this adventure, and Swamp Thing hates it because Constantine's a jerk. Um, bringing the Justice League of America into things. Now maybe that was an editorial decision, but honestly, the stories, the initial run of Swamp Thing would have been fine without the Justice League. You know, um, that there was no need for it. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You know, one of the joys of comics, of superhero comics, and Swamp Thing was in that universe for a long time until he split off into Vertigo. But one of the joys of the shared universe is that you get your science fiction mixed in with your horror, mixed in with your fantasy, you know, mixed in with your pulp detectives, and it all gets, you know. So that's part of what we like about comics. Yeah, but anyways, one of the things that I noticed though is that Swamp Thing was so expansive and playful, going in strange directions, you know, things I never expected, and actually, it's my favorite Alan Moore work now. I like it. Maybe because it isn't as rigid as Watchmen or V for Vendetta, two works that I still love a lot and greatly admire. But then there's a point where Alan Moore tries to bring some of that discipline to Swamp Thing, and it fails. And I'll go ahead and let you know what it is, because it's, you know, it's not really going to ruin the enjoyment of anything. You know, so leading up to issue 50, there's been this threat building up, this evil that's coming, and the thing is, now you might recognize that structure. Hey, Alan Moore is leading up to something, you know, and Watchmen, he leads up to Ozymandias's crazy plan that almost sort of works. And in V for Vendetta, he leads up to V's suicide so he can make way for Evie, you know, and also like destroy what's wrong with London and England, you know, or at least attempt to, you know. And so those two big climatic moments really work in both series. But for me, the low point of Moore's run on Swamp Thing was his attempt to create such a climatic moment in Swamp Thing. Because Swamp Thing is a series that branches out, and I think trying to hone it to such a fine point didn't work. He tried to have Swamp Thing face an ultimate evil and defeat that ultimate evil not with brawn or power, but with wisdom. You know, and thematically, I guess it works, but in terms of, you know, in terms of it being a joyful, not joyful, but in terms of it being dramatically satisfying, it's not. If you're a writer and you're leading me to that moment where here we go, here we're up against the great evil, and then the characters talk to the great evil, and you know, and nothing much happens. It's not that good. You know, and that's because Swamp Thing was a character ultimately about exploration. That's not to say that he didn't have villains he fought, which of course he did, but to lead you to this overwhelming question, you know, and as C.S. Eliot says, "Oh, do not ask what is it." Swamp Thing should have never asked that question. Swamp Thing should have never been up against the ultimate evil, which would destroy heaven. Like, you know, let the Spectre fight that one. And let me tell you, the Spectre, I know he lost in the fight, but he should have still kicked his ass. You know, that's what the Spectre does. Yeah. And by the way, let me throw out a little bonus. If you see the cartoon Batman and Harley Quinn, you'll see you'll see Swamp Thing in that sort of role of, hey, I'm wise, and kind of useless. But there, it's played for laughs, and I like that. So, anyways, if this is a lesson, then what have I learned? What I've learned is that I have to decide what kind of story I'm telling and how that fits with my character. And so Swamp Thing is not a fanatic like V, and nor like Ozymandias. Swamp Thing is not a hero. He actually proves that several times in the story, in the series. Not that he doesn't do heroic things, but he's not the guy who goes out there and saves people from the fires and patrols the city and stops the muggings and goes up against the supervillains. He exists in the mystical world. Occasionally, strange, bad things happen, and yes, he does have to go up against those bad things, but that's kind of like ordinary people in the real world. For all his power, he doesn't go and seek the evil out. He's trying to explore himself, and he's trying to explore the world. He's trying to keep his relationship going. So he's more of an accidental hero at times. Anyways, I think. Well, who am I to tell Alan Moore what the hell to do? But but I'll bet if he had it to do over again, he'd look at issue 50 or everything leading up to it and do something different with it. That's an issue where Swamp Thing talks to the Great Evil, and nothing's decided. So, anyways, what I'm doing with the Journeyman character as well, because the Journeyman character is similar to Swamp Thing in that he's an explorer. He wants to know more about himself and the world. He's not somebody who seeks out heroism or adventure. These things just sort of happen. And so I should avoid building up to this character defeating a great evil. I think, in fact, I was thinking of doing just that. I can't tell you what that great evil is. Maybe you'll figure it out. But I was thinking of doing that. I was thinking, like, what if he does go against this great evil? I was even plotting the story out, but now looking at the way that Moore sort of fell flat, I wonder what would have happened if Moore had Swamp Thing just thrash that great evil. Reach out into and use the power of the earth, of all the green, and bounce that great evil around, and then maybe for good measure show the great evil the beauty of the green, and that's why the great evil ultimately is defeated, or something like that. It would have been more dramatically satisfying, but what would Swamp Thing have done for an encore? You know, what would Moore have done for an encore after that? You know, and similarly, if Journeyman defeats this great nemesis that I had in mind, um, you know, if he defeats something that nobody in myth or legend, you know, or fantasy has ever really defeated, you know, um, then what happens to the journeyman that we knew, the guy who sort of like stumbling through things? You know, it's a radical departure for these characters. Like, it's one thing to defeat something that's on your level. It's another thing, you know, it's another thing to be like the hero that defeats Satan. You know, that's too much. You know, leave that to the angels like Michael. All right. Yeah. So that's basically it. That changes some of what I'm doing, but I'm okay with that. And despite my dissatisfaction with that one issue, Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing is wonderful. The art is beautiful and creepy and strange. You know, it's just a different Alan Moore, you know, than the one I need from Watchmen and V for Vendetta. And now I'm gonna have to look up Promethea as well, because I think it has some of the same qualities too. Anyways, that's almost it. Well, I keep wanting to say a little more. Okay, so Journey, the artist you see here, my best friend, my collaborator, just got a gig illustrating basically everything in a Legends of the Flame Princess product, and I couldn't be happier for him. You know, it has something to do with medieval satanic clowns. You know, so that's going to be creepy and strange and weird too, and wonderful. All right, I'll see you tomorrow on a stream. Bye.